function very well, because what they did was this: work willingly at whatever you do as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. And that's something that we as believers, we as followers of Jesus need to do. Sometimes that's not easy when you think about, especially if you got a boss that's mean, that don't understand. It's very hard, doesn't treat you well. It's very hard. But think of the witness that we give to everybody around us if we're able to do that. If we don't join in with the other employees in bashing the boss or bashing whatever it is, the way things are. I want you to think about that just for a little bit. And as I work into what I want to share with you, you can now put up the message title, please. It's a theophany. If you watch me turning around a lot, it's not because I don't want to look at you guys, all right? We're having a little technical issue with the thing in the back, so I can't see what's behind me, so I'm going to have to spin around every so often. So I think we can be okay with that. It's the old way I used to preach anyway. So it brings back maybe nostalgia and some old things as we have moved forward. Matter of fact, if we would lose it all, we'd all have to get our Bibles out and just go through the Bible, and I don't know that would be all that bad. If we had to do that. So I'm flexible. Hopefully you are as well. A theophany. I learned a new word actually 2 weeks ago as I was working on this message. A theophany. What is a theophany? That's the question. Well, a theophany is the time when God shows up and you recognize it's God. See, I used to live in a world of luck. Either had good luck or had bad luck. Oh, what luck. Oh, or happenstance. Oh, that's just coincidence. What a coincidence. Things worked out. And when I came to know Jesus, one of the things that happened to me was it's like blinders were taken off my eyes, and I was able to see God doing lots of things. God showed up in many different ways. God is supernatural, so in the way that he shows up that it's God is something that was supernatural. So if you're a follower of Jesus, you have had theophanies. You have had times when you were in trouble, whatever, life wasn't going well, however that looked. And then all of a sudden, something unexpected, not being able to be described or explained in normal, everyday circumstance. And you knew it was God. God showed up and did amazing. Now think about that. When that happens, what does that do to you? It encourages us, doesn't it? Here's something I learned too. Every time it happens, I'm surprised. Are you not surprised? Why am I surprised? I serve a God. We just sang about a God that does all these amazing things. He's awesome. He's faithful. He's all of these things we just sang about. Why are we surprised when he shows up? Because it's supernatural. We're not expecting it. And so when he shows up in the way that he does, it's just like totally amazing. So I want to talk about a theophany today, when God shows up. And if you have a Bible and you're one that likes to have a Bible, and open up to Daniel chapter 3. And it's more scripture than I like to usually deal with, but you can't stop the story because it's one big story. So we're going to look at that. Oh, I got my thing here. Sorry about that. Let's see here. First, it's a story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. One of my favorites as a kid in Sunday school, Bible school, to look at that. But I only knew them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But I think they would have rather been known by Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Why? Because that's the name, their Jewish names. That's the name they were given from their mother and father when they were in Judah, before they were taken into captivity. But when they were taken into captivity, they happened to be part of the group that was chosen. They were evaluated and said, okay, these young men are from nobility, from royal family. They were from the tribe of Judah. These three men look like they have the potential that we could use them in our government. And that's what they did. And they hauled them off to Babylon to be trained to be able to serve King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. That's what the design was. And so to do that, to try to get them to assimilate into that culture, what did they do? They gave them different names. That's where he come up with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the interesting thing is what their names meant. Now, I know today in this world, our names mean something, but in many cases, it's just mom or dad liked that name. We'll pick that name for our kid, and we'll get that. But back here, there was seemed like a lot more thought was put into maybe what the name meant and what it was about. So here we see Hananiah was, Yah is gracious. If we know anything about the Bible, we know that Yah was a name for God. Yahweh, we might have heard that. Yah is gracious. And now his name got changed to Shadrach, which meant command of Aku, which was the moon god in the Babylonian culture. So you see what they're trying to do, replace Yahweh with Aku. All right, and we see the same thing with Mishael, who was then named Meshach, and it was who is what El is. Now El is another name for God, Elohim. We might have heard of that already. And so here it was changed, who is as Aku is, okay. Kind of similar, but different. We're trying to get your focus away from El, from Yahweh. And then Azariah, Yah has helped, was changed to Abednego. Slave of Nebo/Nabu. These were the god or gods of learning and the arts, okay. So you see, Yah has helped, God has helped, and they changed it to, what's going to help you? Learning and the arts is what's going to help you versus God. So it was kind of interesting for me to look at this and say, okay, why do I remember them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? I remember them that way because that's what it was written out in this story. We don't know that name. That came in the first chapter. If you look back in the first chapter of Daniel, that's where you would find the name change. And even Daniel had a different name. So they changed their names to try to get them to buy into the Babylonian culture and train them. And one of the things that happened was these three were pretty high up in government. They had worked their way up into governing the province of Babylon. Okay, the province of Babylon. That's where they were working within the government there. So this is the story. These are the guys that were part of this. So let's look at Daniel 3. Daniel 3 says this. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high, that's 90 feet, and 6 cubits wide, that's 9 feet. I'm not sure how that would stand. I'd have to get some of you guys that know how that would work, but there had to be, maybe in my mind, some kind of guy wire stuff, because if it's only 9 feet wide, 90 feet high, I think it would push over pretty easily. But anyway, it was made of gold, and it was that tall, and it was set up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So it was right in that province. Who was helping govern the province of Babylon? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He then summoned, and here's these names, a satrap, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. Now, from now on, that's repeated a number of times. So I'm going to shorten it. The government, okay? He got his government officials. That's what I'm going to use. Because I had to look up some of those names. I didn't understand them. If he would have used something like the mayors, the township supervisors, we know governors one, magistrates, we understand magistrates, and did some of that, then I would have understood it a little bit more. But anyway, we'll just call them the government officials. And they came for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And as they were gathered in this plain all around, all of them from all over the provinces, okay? One other thing I want to, I'll get to that later. It wasn't just Babylon province. There was many provinces because Babylon was the world power at the time. And so they had gone out and conquered many countries and brought them all back and brought people back, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, brought them back, and the best of the best to help them, and did all of that. So they had a lot of provinces. So this was a lot of people who were set up there to govern, not just one province. Okay, so there was this herald, and he had to proclaim really loud, nations and people of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. I'm going to shorten that up because they say that a lot. So we're going to call that what? Whenever they play the music, okay? That's how I'm going to do that. All right? Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Verse 7, therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. That makes sense. What most of the people there knew, they had their gods, but in most cases they understood that their gods weren't very powerful. This is how they looked at it. If my country beat your country, then my God was more powerful than your God. Okay? And depending on the weather, what happens, either the God was happy with them or he was mad at them. And so they weren't opposed to having many gods. It was a culture that had lots of gods, not unlike the culture we live in today. We may not have them, we may not call them Aku or Nebo or anything like that, but we're a culture that has a lot of idols. And we can look around, and what an idol is something that takes the place of God. That's what an idol is, something that takes the place of God. If you remember the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20, it says what? Thou shalt have no other little g gods before me. And that was God talking, telling Moses. So here's the question. If you're thinking about yourself, what kind of idols do I maybe have in my world? Is there anything that takes the place or goes before God? Here's one of them. This is a difficult one. Sometimes family is the idol. You ever hear that? Family can be the idol. There is nothing more important than family, I heard people say. Is that true? For followers of Jesus, brothers and sisters, is that true? No, that's not true. Because if that's more important than God, then it becomes our idol. How many of you know that if you put God first, family takes care of itself? If you worship and honor and live by God's principle, your family will take care of itself because you will love them the way they're supposed to be loved. Make sense? So family can be one. I see sports as a huge idol in our culture today. A lot of people don't have time to go to church anymore to even worship God because they got to go to this game or that game. They got to travel over to this state or that state to play all weekend long. And they put lots of money into it. Lots of money into it. And sports on the television and all of that, the big games, it's just, I watch it and I see so many people so involved. They talk more about sports than they talk about God. The Bible says, where your treasure is, there is your heart. Think about that. If there's a treasure and and your heart is in that treasure, who do you talk about? What do you talk about? You talk about that treasure. Okay? You talk about that. So, does sports come before God? Big one in this area. One more thing, and then you can broaden it all the way out. Hunting. Does hunting come before God? I know some men that hunting comes before God. Anyway, you understand what I'm talking about, the idol. So this was a culture that had lots of idols. And so one more idol wasn't going to matter. And he puts on the caveat of saying, if you do not bow down and worship, what's going to happen? I'm going to burn you up. Fiery furnace. So hey, not a big deal. I'm not going to get burned up. I'm going to fall on my face and I'm going to worship. Whether I want to or not, whether I mean it or not, I'm going to do what he says, because I'm not going to be the one standing up and getting a chance of being thrown into the fiery furnace. Now, verse 8 starts this way. At this time, some astrologers, or other government officials, we could say, came forward and denounced the Jews. Isn't it interesting? Because the Jews are God's chosen people. All through history, we see them being what? Persecuted, and trying to get rid of. All, here's a group of people all through history that, and even today, that people are trying to get it rid of. And it makes me, I understand why, I believe, because they were given the title of what? God's chosen people. And every time you lift somebody up, those who are below try to look at that and try to say, hey, we don't like them. It's how we live, isn't it? If we see somebody getting ahead of where we're at, let's say you're at the job and someone gets the promotion and you don't, and you feel you're just as qualified, if not more qualified, are you able to be encouraging of that person who got that job, or do you sit there and have thoughts about that lean toward, we wouldn't say hate, but that kind of lean toward that, right? Yeah. So. Anyway, these people disliked the Jews. And there was 3 Jews that they disliked most of all. Now think about this. Why did they dislike Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Apparently they got moved up because they dealt with integrity. They were honest. The king could trust them. He liked them because he knew they were doing their job well. As unto what? The Lord. Right? They did their job well as unto the Lord. Think about that. Who were the people that were in charge of the province before Nebuchadnezzar put them in charge? It meant that they lost their jobs. Right? They lost their job. They certainly weren't going to be happy about that. And think about all the other ones that were vying for that job. All the other ones that were brought from all the other provinces that came here, came to worship this or look at that, or were being trained and all of that, came and they were not picked. They were sent someplace else, maybe way far out. So you could see a situation was sitting here of where there was a lot of hate, a lot of jealousy that was all wrapped up in this. And here they come. So they come to King Nebuchadnezzar and say, may the king live forever. I look at that. May the king live forever. I don't think they ever meant that. May the king live forever. No, it's just something they had to say. It's kind of like when you walk down the street and you look at each other and say, how you doing? Do you really care about the other person, how they're doing? It's just something you say. And that's what this was. But I had to stop and think about that because they said it with an exclamation point. May the king live forever, exclamation point. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the music and worships the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. We'll point them out. Now, I believe, the Bible doesn't tell us this, so let me put it this way. In my imagination, there weren't just 3 Jews that didn't stand up. I hope not. I think maybe a lot of the Jewish people stayed home that day. Didn't bother going to work. Didn't bother going there. Why? Because they were brought up under the idea of thou shalt have no other gods before me. And if they did that, they were putting this God before Nebuchadnezzar. Before God. So, I don't know. I'm just thinking, it's not just these 3 guys. These were the 3 most prominent guys. Why? Because they were the rulers. They were managing the province of Babylon, the king's province. Okay, so they came and pointed that out. They don't serve your God nor worship the image of gold. Now, how did Nebuchadnezzar respond to that? See the first 2 words? Furious with rage. Quick temper this guy had. Immediately got angry. Why? It doesn't tell us what the image was made of who, it says it's an image. But I have a feeling it was the image of who? King Nebuchadnezzar. So basically, they were saying, we're not going to worship you. Because that's what some of these kings, they were, almost everywhere you read about it in history and you look at it, people who are like in a king or dictatorship or something like that, when you hear about them and you read about them, what is the number one, I'm not sure, I don't have a word for it. What is the number one quality? It's not really a quality. Or what's the one word that could describe almost all of them? How about arrogant? Aren't they arrogant? They think a lot of themselves. They put up statues of themselves. And usually once they lose power, what do they do with the statue? What do the people do with the statue? They tear it down and grind it up. Or they have big pictures of themselves, up. I'm thinking Mao Zedong. I remember seeing pictures, big pictures. What was he doing? Hey, look at me, I'm the best. Maybe even thought he was God. Well, this is what Nebuchadnezzar was. He was thinking that he was as good, if not better, than all the other gods. He was a god, and he wanted people to worship him. That's why it made him mad. If it was a gold statue of some other god, it wouldn't have mattered as much to him, I don't think. But it was because they were saying, we're not going to worship you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? We're not going to do that. Why weren't they going to do that? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now, thinking back, they were raised with that, with the Ten Commandments. They were raised with that. So it wasn't just today that they decided and had a big, meeting among themselves, say, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? No. They had already made this commitment to God years ago, before they were even taken into captivity. And so it was kind of a no-brainer for them to be able to do this. All right? And so Nebuchadnezzar says, okay, I'm mad at you. He said, bring them in, right? Come here. And he asked them the question, is it true that you do not serve my gods nor worship the image of gold I set up or myself? Now, when you hear the music, he's like giving them a second chance, and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? See, you see the picture? He already thinks in his mind that he is stronger, more powerful than any god that's out there. You see the arrogance? That's who he was. He said, I'm God, worship me, and if you don't, I'm going to throw you in a fiery furnace and nobody's going to save you because I'm the most powerful. There we go. This is the best portion of all. And I want you to, if you're falling asleep on me, I want you to wake up and pay attention. Okay? This is where the rubber meets the road. This is what we need to learn from this passage. Okay? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. How did they know that? From experiences with God. Even in times of ugliness, think about this, they were taken into captivity. That's not a nice thing. It meant that they probably watched maybe even some of their family be put to death. They probably watched all of their land being trashed, their homes being destroyed. And they were hauled off by force to Babylon. So it wasn't that everything was always great, great, great for them. But in the midst of all of that stuff, they had theophanies that were not written about. Okay? So they already knew because he said, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. What are they saying? Our God is more powerful than you. Isn't that cool? And next, and I highlighted that, but even if he does not, We want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. So we're standing strong. Even if God doesn't show up, we're still not going to worship you. And we'll burn up and die. What did they know? Life is better with God than without God. If we die today and you're a follower of Jesus, where do you go? Heaven. Is that worse than here? No, it's better. So they're understanding this. Now here's the question for us. Are we willing to die for Jesus? Are you willing to die for Jesus? Craig, are you willing to die for Jesus? That's a tough one. Didn't think about it always that way. We live in a land that's not too much of an thing that would happen. We're pretty safe here. We can gather. We can go out in the street. We can share our faith here. That might start to change. But there's places in this world where if you're a Christian, you better be willing to die, to stand up. And that's the question for all of us. Do we love God enough to be willing to die for him? To be willing to say, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, my God will save me, but even if he doesn't save me, I'm with you, God. Wow. I hope I am. And I think we can be, even if we have doubts about it, because you, me, all of us who follow Jesus, we have the Holy Spirit, this God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego living within us. And he is the God that is all-powerful, awesome, and can do the impossible. One of the things we were talking about with someone here was just the fact of the peace that comes over followers of Jesus when it comes time to dying. God's Spirit gets poured out as peace over people when that time happens. If you remember nothing, remember this right here. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. You ever see someone when they go from angry to furious and rage and see their face change? You can see it in their body language and their face. And that's what you see, an attitude change. He ordered the furnace. And see, Nebuchadnezzar's a little bit out there in terms of, he goes off the deep end. He's like a parent that's going to ground you forever. Some of you may have said that. I've said that. Because we were angry. And this kind of like he is. He's going to turn up the heat. Why? The fiery furnace is going to burn him up no matter what, but he's going to turn it up 7 times hotter, he says, right? And commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. The flames was so hot that they went to throw them in. Now, this kind of gruesome picture. But their clothes and their body combusted from the heat that was around them. Didn't say they got into the furnace. It was from the heat and the flames from the furnace. And so what would burn? Their clothing and in turn themselves. A horrible way to die. But that's what happened to these men. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the only thing that burned was the ropes that they were tied with. There, immediately God put that heat shield around them, okay? So that they fell into the fire, and those ropes burned up. And then Nebuchadnezzar sees this. He leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? And they replied, certainly, your majesty. And he said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Some people, in my reading, some people think that might have been the incarnate Jesus, the pre-incarnate Jesus. Let me say that right. I don't think it was. I think the scripture tells us what it was. Could it have been? Okay, yeah, maybe it could have been. But later on we'll see in this next portion that Nebuchadnezzar called him an angel. So whether it was an angel or was Jesus really means nothing, okay? What I want you to see is not only did he save them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, from the fire, putting that heat shield around them, allowing it to burn, that they had freedom. They were walking around inside this huge furnace. But they weren't alone. They weren't alone. God sent a companion to walk with them in the fiery furnace. Everybody knows this. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Who said that? That came from God, right? Through Jesus. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Anytime that your life is tough and that you're walking around, because there's sometimes, if we're honest with each other, we feel like God isn't there. And part of the theophany is when we experience God's move within whatever the situation we're in, we see what? That God was there. Okay? God is with us. God walks with us. He still had them go into the fiery furnace. He saved them from that. And that to the point where Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants, got this? Of the Most High God. Come out, come here. What changed? He was a raging lunatic, right? 7 times hotter, killed some of his men. Just because they didn't bow down to an image probably of himself. And all of a sudden his attitude changed to what? He saw, not only did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have the theophany, but he had a theophany because he saw God. And he called him what? The Most High God. He was getting his mind changed. He was experiencing the power, the awesomeness of the Most High God. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the government people crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their head singed. And let me tell you, hair goes up fast. If I had an experience, I worked on furnaces one time. I was looking through to see if it was going to light, if the oil burner was going to light, and all of a sudden it lit, and it shot flame right out, right into my face. And I had glasses on, but it took all the eyebrows right off. Like that. So that's a pretty interesting statement. Not even the hair was singed, and their robes were not scorched, and there was absolutely no smell of fire on them. You don't even have to be close to a fire to get the smell of fire on your clothes. Those of you who burn wood, you know that. Sometimes you get concerned about, do I smell too much like smoke when I go out of my house, right? And it wasn't there. No evidence showed that they were in the fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God, now he's praising God, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and here he goes being goofy again, be cut into pieces, their houses be turned into piles of rubble. for no other God can save this way. But God can save that way without cutting people up and destroying their homes. He's a little bit out there. Hopefully, in his experience with God, somewhere down the line, he mellowed a bit. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. I'm not sure how he could have promoted them farther, but he did. Not only they went through that, they were faithful to God. They went through that, and they got a promotion from the king. Here's some things I want you to look and learn from this. What I learned from this, I want to share with you. You shall have no other gods before me. I think I always heard that, but I think it was just really hammered home in my life, that I am not to have any other gods before me. I'm evaluating my life to see what I'm putting before God. I would like you to evaluate your life to see in your world, what are you putting before God? Maybe you're not. Hallelujah. But so many of us, Satan can work his way in. He is the master deceiver. And he can have you thinking this is more important, that is more important. All of this stuff is more important than God. Number 2, fear God, not man. Ooh, I struggle with this too. Sometimes I fear men more than I fear God. And that's kind of crazy when you think about it, because God knows everything. God sees everything. I can't hide everything, right? Fear God, not man. Work as unto the Lord, the verse we had in the very beginning. That's what they did. Even though how could you not have some kind of hatred or distaste, at least, for people who ransacked your country, probably tore your house down, killed some of your relatives, and drug you off into another country? And yet they worked diligently, became honest, trustworthy employees of the king. I don't know of any other tougher situation than that. Obedience brings blessing. How were they blessed? Well, they were obedient to God. They went through a fire without any evidence of being in a fire, and they ended up getting promoted. Trust God for the outcome. Even though, as they did, they trusted God for the outcome. Whether God shows up, or even if God didn't show up and they were all cremated, they were still going to serve God. Why? Because they knew what God had promised for them before. They knew that God was with them, not against them. They knew that He had something better for them if this wasn't it. Worship and praise Him only. Worship and praise Him only. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says this: trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths.